There is a particular heavy quality to the silence at Evergreen Ridge, a silence that doesn't just signify the absence of noise, but rather the presence of peace, a peace I spent 30 years earning through the chaotic, high-decibel theater of urban warfare and tactical interventions as the lead tactical commander for the Metro State Elite Response Unit. My life had been a long, grueling succession of iron and adrenaline, measured in the rhythmic thrum of heavy rotors, the bone-shaking concussions of breaching charges, and the desperate, jagged breathing of men caught in the crosshairs of fate. So when I finally hammered the last cedar plank into the last sanctuary, my cabin on the edge of Silver Mirror Lake, I wasn't just building a house. I was constructing a cathedral for my own sanity. It was a Saturday in late September, the kind of evening where the air carries a sharp, metallic bite of early frost rolling off the distant peaks, and I was surrounded by the only men who truly knew the weight of my silence. Miller, Hicks, and Vance, brothers in arms who had pulled me from the wreckage of a dozen failing missions and who now sat in the flickering amber glow of a hickory fire. The scent of prime Angus ribeyes searing on the grate, mingling with the earthy perfume of damp pine needles. We were listening to the gravelly, outlaw poetry of Waylon Jennings drifting from a battered speaker, a sound so low it barely disturbed the surface of the obsidian lake. Yet apparently, it was loud enough to summon the one thing more dangerous than a barricaded suspect, a woman with a title and a sense of divine entitlement. The intrusion began not with a knock, but with a violent, arrogant sweep of high-intensity LED headlights cutting through the ancient trees like a serrated blade as a pearl-white luxury SUV. The kind of vehicle that screams, "I have a dedicated litigation attorney and a Pilates membership," roared up my private gravel drive with a reckless disregard for the terrain. It screeched to a halt mere inches from my porch, hilling a cloud of dust that settled over our stakes. And out stepped Victoria Sterling, the sovereign president of the Highland Estates HOA, a woman who looked like she had been carved out of beige granite and dressed in a power suit that had no business being within 50 miles of a forest. "Do you have any idea what the time is?" she shrieked, her voice a shrill, piercing intrusion that seemed to vibrate the very glass in my windows, as she marched toward us with an iPad clutched to her chest like a holy relic of suburban law. I didn't stand. I simply remained anchored in my chair, my hand wrapped around a glass of neat bourbon, as I watched the firelight dance in her eyes that were currently overflowing with a toxic cocktail of fury and self-importance. I had been tracking the particulate matter from this smoke for 45 minutes, and between the acoustic pollution of that, music, and the blatant violation of Clean Air Ordinance 402, I am officially declaring this gathering a nuisance to the Highland Estates community, and I demand you extinguish that fire and vacate these premises immediately. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon, letting the liquid burn before I spoke in that low, tactical hum that had de-escalated 1,000 riots. "Mrs. Sterling, you are currently standing a full mile outside the geographic jurisdiction of your gated kingdom, on unincorporated land that I have paid taxes on for 3 decades, and while I appreciate your dedication to the shade of your neighbor's curtains, you are currently trespassing on my dirt, so I suggest you put that SUV in reverse before I decide to treat this as a security breach." She recoiled as if I had struck her, her face turning a vibrant, unnatural shade of violet. And in that moment, as she reached for her phone with a predatory smirk, I realized she wasn't just a nuisance. She was a woman who had spent her entire life using the system as a blunt instrument to crush anyone who dared to tell her no. And tonight, she was about to pull the pin on a grenade she wasn't prepared to drop. The air grew cold, not from the mountain breeze, but from the chilling realization that Victoria was no longer merely complaining. She was scripting a tragedy as she stood by her white SUV and began a theatrical performance for the 911 dispatcher that would have won her an Oscar in a world where perjury was rewarded. "Help! I'm at Silver Mirror Lake. I've stumbled upon an illegal militia. They have rifles, they're drinking, and, oh God, I think I saw them dragging a hostage into that cabin. They're threatening me. Please send the SWAT team. I'm fearing for my life." I felt a wave of profound disgust wash over me, a nauseating cocktail of anger and disappointment. because I knew exactly what that call triggered: a Tier 1 active shooter protocol that would mobilize every available unit in the county, sending young officers racing through dark, winding roads under the impression they were headed into a massacre. I didn't panic because 30 years of lead-filled air teaches you that panic is a luxury for the dead. So I reached for my encrypted tactical radio, the one linked directly to the regional command center, and keyed the mic with a steady thumb. Dispatch, this is Commander Elias Thorne. Authorization Alpha 79er. Do you copy? I said, my voice cutting through the radio static like a knife through silk. Copy, Commander. We're seeing a high-priority call at your 20. What's the status? Listen to me carefully, I replied. The caller is Victoria Sterling, and she's initiating a malicious code 33 false report. Do not intercept the rollout. Let the tactical response proceed as a live evidence exercise. I want Sergeant McAllister leading the charge, and I want every body cam active from the moment they hit the gravel, because I intend to document every second of this woman's descent into legal hell. 15 minutes later, the mountain didn't just wake up. It exploded with the mechanical roar of authority as the distant, haunting wail of sirens began to echo off the rock faces, followed shortly by the arrival of a neon-lit dragon of police cruisers and K-9 units, and finally, the heavy, rhythmic vibration of the Lenco Bearcat, an 8-ton armored predator that I had personally authorized for purchase, which lurched into my yard like a beast from a nightmare. Victoria was dancing with joy, her face illuminated by the strobe light frenzy of red and blue, waving her arms as if she were a general directing an invasion, screaming at the top of her lungs. That's him, the one in the apron. He's the leader. Arrest him before he kills us all. The tactical team spilled out of the vehicles with the fluid, lethal grace of men who had done this 1,000 times, their suppressed rifles at the low ready, their high-lumen weapon lights turning the forest into a high-definition stage where the only actors were the guilty and the brave. Sergeant McAllister, a man whose jaw looked like it was carved out of the same granite as the peaks above us, stepped out of the Bearcat, his eyes scanning the scene. The ribeyes, the bourbon, the four of us standing calmly by the fire. And then he turned his gaze to the woman who was currently vibrating with psychotic triumph. He walked past her as if she were a ghost, stopped 2 feet in front of me, and snapped a salute so crisp it echoed against the cabin walls. Commander Thorne, sir. The elite response unit is on site, and the perimeter is sterilized. How do you wish to proceed with the individual who fabricated the active shooter profile? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute, as the smile on Victoria's face didn't just fade, it disintegrated. Her iPad slipping from her numb fingers and clattering onto the stones as she realized that the man she had tried to erase was the very man who commanded the army she had summoned to do her dirty work. I walked toward her, my footsteps deliberate and echoing in the sudden quiet of the mountain. And as I stood over her, the blue and red lights reflecting in her wide, terrified eyes, I saw the exact moment she realized that entitlement has a ceiling, and she had just crashed through it at 100 miles an hour. You wanted the real law, Victoria, I said, my voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. And now you have it. You have 24 officers, 2 K-9 teams, and an armored vehicle that costs more than your house, all standing witness to the fact that you lied to a federal dispatcher and put every life in this clearing at risk for the sake of your HOA ego. I didn't arrest her that night. Not because I was being kind, but because I knew that the legal system is a slow-turning mill that grinds exceeding fine, and I wanted her to spend the next 48 hours in the agonizing purgatory of her own making, wondering when the knock at her door would finally come. I had McAllister and his men file a meticulous 40-page report detailing the malicious misuse of emergency services and filing a false felony report, and I made sure every second of the body cam footage, the footage of her dancing with joy at the prospect of our arrest, was preserved in the county's secure servers. The fallout was a masterpiece of karmic retribution, beginning with the district attorney, an old friend who had no patience for Karens with a god complex, who pushed for the maximum fines and a suspended jail sentence that would haunt her record forever. But the real blow came from within her own kingdom. I initiated a forensic audit of the Highland Estates HOA books, an investigation that revealed Victoria had been treating the community's maintenance funds as her personal miscellaneous account for years, leading to a cascade of embezzlement charges that stripped her of her presidency, her mansion, and her social standing in a single, brutal month. I sat on my porch a few weeks later, the fire crackling softly and the lake returned to its obsidian stillness, and as I watched the embers die down, I realized that true power isn't about being able to call in a SWAT team. It's about having the integrity to never need one. Victoria Sterling had tried to use the law as a sword, only to find that when you swing a blade that heavy without a handle, you're the one who ends up bleeding, and as her for sale sign was hammered into the lawn of her former estate, the silence at Evergreen Ridge finally felt like it belonged to me again. The law is meant to be a shield for the innocent, not a remote control weapon for the petty. And when someone like Victoria tries to weaponize the men and women who serve, they find out very quickly that the real law has a very long memory. Was it a justified use of resources to let the SWAT team deploy just to ensure there was undeniable evidence of her lie? Or was it a waste of taxpayer money for a personal lesson? Should the penalties for swatting or false reporting be increased to mandatory prison time, given the high risk of accidental death in these situations? If you were a neighbor in Highland Estates, would you have stood up to her sooner? Or is the fear of an HOA dictator too great for most people to handle? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe justice was served. I'm Elias Thorne, and remember, watch your boundaries, because you never know who's sitting on the other side of the fence.